booking the late travel reservation. He had been advised booking the late arrival the clock read okay. The clock read 17 minutes after midnight when he The clock read 17 minutes after midnight when he disembarked from the plane. Why can't I freaking say this sentence? He despised his depressing thoughts and redirected them. Okay. He despised his oh God, here we go, guys. Welcome back to my channel. I am Dina Haynes, and it is a hot and balmy evening here in Los Angeles. Why? Not because the weather is particularly hot, but because I live in a 100-year-old building with no air conditioning and little to no insulation. Yeah, we'll just call it no insulation. And I want you to join me. Snuggle up while you listen to me read my book called Neesa. It's a contemporary romance novel that does get a little steamy at times. So this is not for the kiddies. And if it's not for you, I won't be offended. I just want you to enjoy my writing stylings as I bring to you my original reality book series for free on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. And if you're new to my channel, go back to the beginning and relax. Put that playlist on automatic and just sit back and listen, because I am about to drop some spoilers on the last chapter. Ah, yes, chapter 25. There were two parts to this chapter, guys. In the first part, we got to see the aftermath of Neesa telling Reuben that she's pregnant, and we got to see Reuben break down. He didn't handle the news very well. And in the second part, we got to see Neesa with her girlfriends, basically putting him on blast. But funny enough, the most interesting thing about that scene was that Annabelle came out of her shell, and she kind of told Neesa and Claire off. She gave them her 2 cents, and it was worth way more than that. So hopefully you enjoyed it. If not, definitely go back and check it out. Otherwise, we're about to go into chapter 26. Why didn't you tell me I didn't have any lipstick on? You hateful, you know what's. Just kidding. That's why I now have lipstick on, just so you're wondering. I stopped a video and looked at it and saw something very out of place, my lips. So now they're on, and let's continue. All right, this is chapter 26, Reuben's perspective. Passengers, the fasten your seatbelt sign has been turned on as we begin our descent into Denver. Welcome to Colorado. Cold pressed in through the windows from the weather outside. Wishing he owned a heavier jacket, Reuben muttered to himself. You're not in sunny California anymore. There had been no time to plan since he'd booked a last-minute flight on the red-eye. Damn if Neesa hadn't been right about the whole resentment thing. The tension between them was a living, breathing wall, keeping them from any heavy petting kind of activity, and he wasn't any closer to accepting the whole baby dilemma. Part of the problem was that he knew she could raise it on her own, and once the baby came, his purpose in their relationship would diminish as a result if he didn't step up to the responsibility. He needed to get over it, though, and quick, because the baby wouldn't wait for their bullshit to run its course, which was why he'd made an impromptu decision to take her original advice. He was responsible for the predicament they were in. It was his baggage getting in the way. So he'd made a rash decision and bounced. Man, he wished he had told Denise he was going. And where? After 3 hours of rehashing his logic, he realized it hadn't been his brightest moment, but he didn't want to take another hit to his pride. Carter's words echoed in his mind. If you don't feel emotionally castrated every time you're in her presence, then she's not the one. Yeah, well, the past week had been particularly rough. This trip was about taking his balls back. He peered at the city lights below, twinkling in a sea of black. It had been days since they'd made love. 4 days and 17 minutes to be exact. The last go-round between the sheets had been a practice in sex by the numbers, bland and formulaic at best. He had to make things right. This trip was about taking her advice and showing her he'd listened, but he didn't want her to be disappointed if it went bad. She had enough on her plate, working full-time and growing a human inside of her. His human. He needed to do this alone. Best case scenario, he'd meet the old man and, as Denise had said, realize he had more than piece of shit DNA in his makeup and get over himself. Worst case scenario, he'd find out his father was a grade A asshole, confirming the fears he'd had all these years. The outcome from the latter might be ugly, and he sure as shit didn't want any witnesses to his breakdown. Still, there was another scenario to consider. The guy he found might not be his dad after all, and then he was back to square one. Even now, he doubted this meeting was going to have the effect Denise was praying for. The only thing he could guarantee was that he still loved her, still craved her, still wanted to spend his life with her. She had so much faith in him that he'd make a good father. He wished he could borrow it from her. Whenever he thought about it, he kept circling back to his terrible eating habits and his promiscuous lifestyle. It wouldn't be right to churn out another woman-using male and send him into the world. And if it was a girl, he shook his head. Doomed. He didn't think God was into taking suggestions about which parent to craft the baby after. It'd be his weird, fucked up luck if their child turned out like him or his mother. He despised his depressing thoughts and redirected them to the facts he'd learned about his father. Eddie Murray was the name that had been written on the marriage certificate. The guy he'd found was named Edward Surrey, in his late 50s now. He had moved to Boulder right around the time Reuben was still cooking in his mother's oven. Reuben's research showed him employed by the University of Colorado Boulder a couple of years after arriving in town, but not as a professor. He had found lots of Mr. Surreys on Facebook, but the only one living in Boulder was African American. She had a ton of family pictures posted, but after skimming a few, he quickly came to the conclusion that she was the wrong woman. If Edward Surrey was indeed Reuben's father, then his name, his birth certificate, and his whole identity were a lie. A fucking misprint in the annals of his existence. This fact alone had kept him from pursuing any further answers all these years. His stomach was in knots about finding out for sure who he was, or that he was a great big nobody. The clock read 17 minutes after midnight when he disembarked from the plane. Most of the airport restaurants and cafes were dark and empty, much to his disappointment, until the golden arches loomed up ahead. He ordered a McCafe caramel mocha to go, then picked up his rental car and used his phone's navigation app to get him from Denver to his Boulder motel. Traffic was light this time of night, and a half hour later he coasted into his destination city. He was tempted to take a drive past the house of the man he suspected might be his father, but the streets were so dark and unfamiliar, the idea reeked of stupid thinking. Booking the late arrival reservation, he had been advised to call the motel when he got close. 15 minutes after he talked to the manager, he pulled into the parking lot. Most of the lights were off except for one building. He parked out front and stepped into the frigid air. A biting breeze slapped him across the face and seeped straight through his thin layers down to his bones. Shoving his hands into the pockets of his jacket, he hunched over and shivered against the cold. He glanced around and saw that the place was a bunch of woodsy cabins strewn together. He sprinted to the front door of what appeared to be the main cabin and ducked inside. A man about his age stood behind the counter. A door was cracked open on the opposite wall, where he saw a lamp next to a couch and heard the soft tones of a TV. Must have been his living quarters. The guy asked, "Mr. Murray?" Reuben said, "Yep, sorry I'm so late." The guy said, "No problem. We have your credit card on file, so you're good to go." He gave Reuben the key and a map of the grounds with his cabin circled and said, "There should be parking right outside your door. Breakfast is from 7 to 10. Call if you need anything." Reuben said, "Thanks a lot. Good night." The guy waved. "Night." The cabin wasn't far from the main building. Reuben pulled the car into an unmarked slot, his headlights shining on a door with the room number that matched his key, and cut the engine. His phone buzzed on the seat next to him. He lifted it to find that Denise had left him several texts, and he had a few missed calls. The screen read, "Where are you?" Cursing, he debated whether to text back. Anything he said would piss her off. God, was he going to lie to her? She would worry if he didn't say something. He texted, "Had to leave town on a case. Sorry I didn't tell you. Be back in a few days." That was sort of the truth. Then he added, "Love you." He grabbed his duffel bag out of the back seat and headed to the room. They were still using actual key locks, and he was stumped when he tried to remember the last time he'd seen a hotel employ the relics. Once inside, he turned on the desk lamp near the door. The room was a tight fit but efficient. Double bed, TV, mini fridge, and a bathroom through the door on the opposite side of the room. He set his bag on the bed, dressed in white linens, impressed by how clean everything looked. With hopes of enjoying the free breakfast, he undressed quickly, set his phone alarm, and hit the sheets. That's it. That's the end of chapter 26. Be sure to like the video if you haven't already. And if you like this content, hit subscribe and activate the little bell icon so that you'll be notified when the next video goes up. That'll be for chapter number 27. You won't want to miss it.